from the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. I'm Allison Lips. Today, Johnny Mack joins me. He is the man behind Daily Comedy News. You can find that on Substack. Welcome to GFib, uh, Johnny. Johnny.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And I invited you to come on to talk about Jay Leno. Those who have followed me know that I am a Letterman fan. I'm also a Conan fan. And I've appeared on the Letterman podcast multiple times. I know you have also. But as someone who reads Daily Comedy News, I have noticed that lately you've been talking a lot about Jay Leno, who for some reason seems to be the most hated man in show business, even though, like, definitely doesn't deserve that. My take on him is that he doesn't know how to read a room.
I've become fascinated by Jay. So this
So
latest
have I.
kerfluffle happened maybe about 6 weeks ago when he weighed in on Colbertgate, as I've been calling it. And all Jay said was, when you talk about politics, you kind of lose half the audience. And I don't think that's crazy.
No.
This week, if I were to share an opinion about Charlie Kirk, I would lose half the audience. And
Yes.
this is just the nature of the media. And it's not like Jay doesn't know what he's talking about. He hosted the Tonight Show for 22 years. We
Yes.
can get into how those 22 years are divided and why we might be mad at Jay, but the internet losing their mind because Jay Leno weighed in on the art of hosting a late night talk show. Like the
How
guy knows
dare
what
you
he's
have
talking.
an opinion?
I'm also Team Letterman. So back in the day when we had to choose sides in the Great Late Night War, I was absolutely Team Dave. I was, almost as sad as Dave that Dave didn't get 11:30. But I also remember, and I've shared this on the Letterman pod, when I used to stay up till 1:30 in the morning because Dave was on at 12:30, I would think to myself, boy, if Dave were ever on at 11:30, I would watch every night. And what wound up
Yes.
happening was I watched the CBS show for about a year, and then I think the next episode of Letterman I watched was his final episode of Late Show, and we can get into why that might be. But
Yes,
I don't
definitely.
know. Jay Leno, he's obviously the worst person in the world, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, who would like a guy who's taking care of his wife who has dementia? I mean, he's a horrible person.
I mean, I don't mean to laugh at the underlying situation, but yes, exactly. There was an article in People magazine over the weekend about how, and we've heard this before, about how Jay is taking care of Mavis, and he's
Yes,
very you can tell that it comes from a place of love, and his
absolutely.
thing is, we've been together forever. Jay, unless there's a shocking development coming, Jay doesn't seem to be out on the side hooking up with models and cheating on his wife. He seems like a guy that
No,
hops on a probably private plane, does a show, comes home, and takes care of his ill wife, and it's
mm,
just from a place of love. And boy, how dare he weigh in on late night television?
no. Like, where does he get off thinking he knows anything about it? My thing with Jay is that everything he has done, granted, I feel like he's one of those guys who should stay away from politics because he's admitted, like, people may find him vanilla, but sometimes you want vanilla. He's not for everyone. And because someone like me, it's like I love Letterman, I love Conan, give me the wacky and the sarcastic. But I grew up watching Leno. Leno was the first late night talk show that I remember watching with my parents until I
Yeah,
was old enough to make those decisions on my own and it wasn't just staying up late is fun.
if I look at Jay Leno's arc, and I think this applies to current host of the Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon here, you have to understand what the Tonight Show is, what the gig is. Going back to the day, back in the early 80s, the two best guests, the people you would root for, hoping they were the guest on tonight's Late Night with David Letterman, was an up and coming New York City comic that people didn't really know. His name was Jerry Seinfeld. This is pre sitcom. But
Who is
when
he?
Jerry would appear on Letterman, he would crush. And the other guy was pretty edgy for 1983,
Yeah.
and he'd come out in a leather jacket and do pointed material. And his name was Jay Leno, who would
Hmm.
also crush every time. Uh, and again, edgy in 2025 might mean somebody appearing on Kill Tony. But in
Yes.
1982, 83, 84, Letterman verse, Jay Leno was edgy-ish. He wasn't Sam Kinison, but he was edgier than, I don't know, Robert Klein or somebody like that.
Right. And with Leno, I don't think you'll find any Letterman fan who outright hates him. I think it's more he was great in the 80s. What's Your Beef? Whenever he appeared on Letterman, there was definitely chemistry there. But afterwards, the paths diverged and Leno evolved for a more mainstream audience. Even though Letterman went over to The Late Show, there was still parts of the show that didn't appeal to everyone. Go back and look at those ratings, and you'll see that Letterman does better on the coast, but Leno does better in the heartland.
Oh yeah, I teach a couple college classes, and I instill in the students. I teach in New Jersey
Oh,
about people I
hey.
call hello about people I call the Americans, and the Americans
Yes.
watch NASCAR and watched Jay Leno, and you might be down in Soho in New York City, and I roll the NASCAR race. How ridiculous! That's silly. There's a
Yes.
lot of people out there who enjoy those things. So when Jay gets the Tonight Show, he understands what the Tonight Show is, and he hosts the Tonight Show. Jimmy Fallon understands what the Tonight Show is. I've encountered Fallon a couple times, found him great to work with. There's a lot more in his toolbox. If you check
Yes.
out the few comedy albums he has put out, there's a lot more there. But he understands what
I
the
have to
Tonight
say,
Show
Cougar
is.
Hunting off his second album is probably my favorite thing he's ever done. I'm not a Fallon fan, so that may seem like a low bar, but it's a great song.
But, what would Jimmy Fallon Unleashed be? Again, he's not going to be the most outrageous comic, but
Exactly.
there's more there. But if we look at the Tonight Show, as much as we all love Saint Conan, our Letterman fans appreciated that Conan kept 12:30 in the same spirit, although doing his own thing.
Yes.
When Conan brings the weirdness to 11:30, it didn't work, and NBC probably panicked too quickly, but there is a
Yes.
case to be made for, uh-oh, did we bet on the wrong horse here? They apparently thought so. So Conan being wacky at 11:30 as opposed to just sitting down and running the program the way it has traditionally been run,
Yes.
you run into some trouble there.
Right. And talking about that time period, it there is something to be said that yes, Conan is ultimately responsible for what happens at 11:30, 11:35, but especially at that time, you could see that the 10 o'clock show, which became the Jay Leno show, leads into the news, which people tend to leave on whichever channel they're currently watching, which leads into The Tonight Show, which is the show that people either watch or they start going to sleep. And the Jay Leno show could have affected Conan's ratings. I do not think that is the sole cause of the show failing, but it was a tremendous miscalculation on NBC's part.
I think the 10 p.m. show was the right idea, just a little too early. If we could adjust the timeline. And if you told me now, Jay
Yes.
Leno's giving up the Tonight Show and he's handing the show over to whoever, to Jimmy Fallon, but Jay's going to do something at 10 o'clock in the era of streaming, cleaning the clock of network TV, budgets, ratings, diminishing people. I'm not sure 10 o'clock doing that format is the wrong idea. It's cheaper
Greg
than making
Gutfield.
another Law and Order. Yeah, Gutfeld's he's
Gutfeld.
doing great. Now CBS might disagree and say that it's very expensive to produce these things. We can get into that. I can easily rattle off 5 things that would save them at least some money. I don't have access to their budgets, but I've got some ideas there. But I don't think 10 o'clock Jay Leno was the craziest idea I've ever heard, and
No, it wasn't.
probably just was right idea a little too early.
Yes. Right idea. 10, 15 years too soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we have 12 different Law and Order spin-offs and Chicago Fire and One Chicago, and NBC has given over their primetime schedule to Dick Wolf.
But it works.
Yeah. It
Or it works as much as anything's going to work in 2025 on broadcast.
exactly. Also, with Jay Leno, there was the whole situation where he didn't. Yes, he was pushed out. This was pretty clear. He did not want to retire. Once that 5 years was up, though, rather than walking away, he partially took the 10 p.m. show because he didn't want his crew to lose their jobs, which, again, very understandable and a caring thing to do. And he likened it at the time to like working at the GM factory, which this is show business. This is not the same thing. But he does come from a blue collar background, even though he has been a millionaire for decades at this point. And that's why I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think he might be either in the wrong industry in terms of how he looks at things. And that goes back to I don't think he knows how to read the room because people are thinking one thing, he's doing something else that is completely justified in his mind. And logically, you can follow those thoughts. And it's hard to argue with a guy who's like, I don't want to put 200 people out of work.
I can see all sides of this. And I've spent some time, a lot of time, as a manager in the broadcasting industry.
Okay.
Now, NBC was smart to have a succession plan. If we look at the NBC Nightly News, they announced Brian Williams is taking this thing over 5 years from now. They did the same sort of
Yeah.
thing. Now, that didn't pan out for unexpected reasons,
Well, it
but
worked until it didn't.
yeah, and to say Brian Williams was going to host the NBC Nightly News was not like crazy talk, like what Brian Williams? That's insane. No, it made sense. Brokaw was getting older, and you had the cool young guy, right? Um,
Yes.
it's not like the Tonight Show told Jay, hey, you've got 6 months left. It was 5 years, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes,
Conan
it was.
waited a long time for that.
Yeah, and
But
everyone.
I can also understand the emotions of being pushed out. I've been honest. At one point, I was pushed out at Sirius XM when I ran the comedy channels. And honestly, in that first year, if for some reason they had come back to me and said, like, oops, we messed up, the new guy's not working out, can you come back? Um, I would have come back, and in my fantasy, I would have dressed like MacArthur and walked down the hallway in a MacArthur hat with the pipe and taken a victory lap because we're all emotional human beings. And I think, now it's a decade later. I don't want that gig. I never think about that gig. And I think I can project my feelings onto Jay Leno there that somebody comes back to you and goes, you know what? We might have messed up here. Do you want the Tonight Show
Yeah,
back? Well, yeah, I liked hosting the Tonight Show. That was what I did. Okay, yeah, I'll come back. Um, if they had, if they had, what if Jay says no? What does NBC do then? Then do they give Conan more rope, or do they hit the Jimmy Fallon panic button even earlier and maybe Jimmy's
yeah,
not ready yet? What if, how does that play out if Jay says no?
that is true. The also that whole with the late night war two, because I call them the late night war one and late night war two. Um, what I found odd was people who were my age, so 18, 19, early 20s at the time in 2009, rallied behind Conan like he was some sort of god. And we're like, old people are taking young people's jobs, and Jay Leno is an example of this. And even at the time, I'm like, they're both baby boomers. What point do you think you're making here?
There was the whole Conan's the victim here, and we all felt bad for Conan because he didn't get enough time to find his legs at 11:30. any of these shows, any of these TV shows, or my podcast or your podcast, go back and listen to the first few episodes. They're not as good as they are now. It takes a time to find your rhythm. And NBC did quickly panic on Conan, so he became the victim.
Yes.
It was very easy to make Jay Leno the bad guy for taking the gig back. Again, if NBC pushes Conan out, would Jimmy Fallon be the bad guy? Would I don't know who they would have turned to.
Yes.
Would Gary Shandling be the bad guy for taking the Tonight Show? I don't know.
I don't know if they would have pulled Gary Shandling out in the year 2009,
But
but
who do you
yes,
pull out in
that
2009?
is true. You probably called Jimmy Fallon up to the big leagues a little earlier than intended.
And then that probably doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going, he Jimmy plays a little more to Middle America than Conan's wackiness, but Fallon hosting late night for several years, that helps you get the reps in and the chops and figuring out how to do this.
Yes.
I'm not sure Fallon succeeding. Especially people love to hate on Jimmy Fallon. I think Fallon succeeding Conan would go worse than Jay coming back.
Yes. With Jay, you've got to at least respect the hustle. The man isn't happy unless he's working or with his wife. That is all the or with his cars. We know that when he was doing the Tonight Show, he would fly to wherever he was performing over the weekend to do a comedy show, then go home, and then do the Tonight Show Monday night. Or if it was a few weeks off, he would do a comedy tour. And he didn't need to do that. He wanted to do that.
He likes to work. He's always said he likes to work. You look at people like Paul McCartney. Why is Paul McCartney touring? He must have Beatles money at some point, but
Yes.
Paul McCartney likes to perform these songs. I guess he doesn't seem to have absurd debts. So Paul McCartney goes on tour and Jay Leno likes doing comedy and he goes out and does comedy, but he also comes home and takes care of his wife at night and has the audacity to weigh in on late night comedy, which is why he's just the worst person that ever lived.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned earlier, which I wasn't aware of, that you teach college in New Jersey. Where do you teach?
I teach at Fairleigh Dickinson University and Montclair State University.
I almost went to Montclair as an undergrad.
Could have taken my class. I started there last year. I teach a podcasting production course. The FDU one is more radio streaming and podcasting.
Yeah, I would not have gone there now. 2009 was when I went to college. I went to Rowan. Then I went to Rutgers for an MBA, and now I'm back at Rowan for television studies.
Awesome.
And currently working on a paper on Conan O'Brien, which is why this is top of mind for me. And what do you think about we can talk about Conan all day long and never mention Jay Leno. But with Jay Leno, it seems like Conan is never that far away.
Yeah, for good or bad, that is going to be on Jay Leno's obituary, right? So Jay
Yeah.
Leno, comedian, blah blah blah, host of the Tonight Show. Jay stepped away. I forget what year it is. 2009, is that the year? Jay stepped away in 2009, but returned to host the show for X more years. But that's absolutely in his obituary now.
Yes.
But as I think about it, Jay Leno is going to be in Conan's obituary too, because Conan briefly hosted the Tonight Show before NBC decided. Blah, blah, blah. So they are tied together. But
Yes.
again, we've in this discussion we've cast Jay as the bad guy here because he came back.
And
If he
he's the
doesn't
worst
come
person in the world.
back, if he doesn't come back, then someone else is the bad guy for not giving Conan enough time. Or maybe they would have given Conan enough time and he would have found it. Who knows?
It was a bad situation all around. It was also when streaming was becoming a thing. Netflix finally lived up to their name and started their streaming platform. At the time, it was $8 a month. Now it is 20. And that was when people were starting to like, oh, what's on Netflix rather and Hulu, Amazon Prime Video or whatever we were calling it at that time were also launched. And the habit of I'm going to go home and I'm going to put on Netflix or Prime Video or Hulu was starting to develop. It wasn't there yet like it is now where it's like what shows are on NBC now. I know the Tonight Show, I know the Today Show, they've been on forever. Law and Order, I'd hear if like SVU went off the air. Um, Mariska Hargitay needs a job, but I'm more likely to put on a streaming service and watch reruns of right now I'm watching Cheers. I was watching the Bob Newhart show prior to that. I'm not looking for whatever is new on NBC now, but then there was still a chance where broadcast TV could grab those people and they would not have succeeded, but they could have possibly delayed that habit from forming since Netflix was not yet mainstream, even in terms of the streaming service. We knew it existed. I didn't get Netflix until I had to call my parents and say, "There's a movie on Netflix. I need Netflix for class. Like Netflix is going to be on your credit card."
Yeah.
Which, if I wasn't a radio, TV, film major, that would be a weird conversation to have. Like, you're an accounting major. Why do you need Netflix again?
So there's something to be said for right combination of host, time, platform.
Yes.
And we should give tons of credit to David Letterman for being able to go across the street and create a second franchise up against the Tonight Show because a lot of people came and failed. Um, so I started to do the mental exercise of, oh, what if Conan had gone somewhere else and taken on Jay Leno? Well, you know what never, ever, ever, ever gets talked about? The 11 years Conan O'Brien did on TBS. Nobody cares. I love Conan, but nobody
Yeah.
cares about the TBS years at all. It never gets mentioned.
No, it doesn't. I would watch occasionally. There were stretches of time where I'm like, okay, I'd watch this. That would last for like 4 months, and then I'd be like, okay. It was a very different show. And I don't know if mainstream attention works well with Conan's comedy. I love Late Night with Conan O'Brien because it is weird and there are things he was doing to get attention that he has since said, like at the time, the promos for his show, it would be like Madonna is on the Tonight Show, and we have U2 as the musical guest. And then it'd be like, don't forget to watch Conan, and Conan's holding a cue card that says
Yeah.
something. Which I was a preteen at the time where I thought this was like the coolest thing, where he's just like with the cue card saying something funny. Where if you're actually him, that is kind of insulting that you get 2 seconds. Like, don't forget he exists.
But it's funny and it just speaks to the power of the Tonight Show franchise. Here we have Conan doing more or less the same thing, but it's on TBS now, which is not 11:30 on NBC. It is not
Yeah.
the late night franchise at 12:30. It's this other thing. It's way up the dial. For those of us a certain age, one of the reasons I got into Johnny Carson was because back in the day of seven channels, I don't know. What am I going to do until 12:30? There's 7 channels. I'll just put
Yeah.
channel 4 on in here in New York. I'll put channel 4 on early. And I
Yes.
started catching the end of the Tonight Show. And as I aged, I realized, oh, wow, this Johnny Carson guy is really good. I see why people talk about him. But spiritually, I was into the counterculture. Hey, let's throw stuff off a 5-story tower that Letterman did,
Yes.
which is the same spirit of Conan in a promo holding a little cue card, making fun of the 12:30 show. But
Yes.
the franchise that is the Tonight Show of
Doesn't
Steve
allow for that.
Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson, Jay Leno. I've been in a lot of board meetings at media companies, and I can imagine a scenario where they're sitting there, they're looking at the ratings, they're panicking, and somebody goes, "Why don't we just bring Jay back?" It just as an aside, and then that becomes a real conversation, and then more and more people go, "Yeah, why don't we bring Jay back?" And then somebody from the sales department is like, "Yeah, with Jay, we were able to do this. Sponsors like him. Conan is a little weird. We're not making as much money." And then
Groupthink.
the group think goes, yeah, why don't we bring Jay back? And I tell you, I've been a media executive in a room, and when you're fighting against 11, 12 other people in that room, it's really difficult. So yeah, why don't we bring Jay back? And there may be proof that they're not wrong because see Conan on TBS. The audience didn't go, yes, Conan was a folk hero that summer, but it
Yes.
didn't work. We all love Stephen Colbert, the folk hero, right now. I triple dog dare Stephen Colbert to do an 11:30 show on TBS. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah. If anything, he's going to do a podcast or Broadway if that interests him. I don't think he's going to some cable channel. And
No, not in 2025.
no,
There
he's not
could
even
be
going back to Comedy Central. Like he's just moving
th-
on.
there could be a scenario where Netflix writes a big enough check and he does kind of the Letterman thing, but I don't think that's the right move either. I think it was Mike on the Letterman pod who said they could see Colbert doing like The Music Man or something on Broadway. And that's probably, I'm not his agent and I'm not getting commission here, but spiritually, that's probably what he should do next rather than attempt a talk show on a streamer because,
Yeah.
we all love John Mulaney, but that thing ain't working. You can tell me the cool people in the room are like, yeah, John Mulaney's great. That thing ain't working.
No, yeah, because of my circle, we all thought it was great, and then the ratings came out, and we're like, oh, well, they'd have to be stupid to give us a third season.
And it's the same kind of thing. He's going for the weird, and sometimes I teach my students. Sometimes I separate John the human being from John the professor from John the media executive. So John the media
Yes.
executive might look at it and be like, "Hey, John Mulaney, why don't you just wear a suit, come out to center stage, do 7 minutes of jokes, and then sit down and interview just Jerry Seinfeld, not Jerry Seinfeld and the earthquake expert, because it's throwing everyone's rhythm off. And I know you're getting off on the weirdness, but it's just not working. As I teach
Yes.
people, when your guest is Jerry Seinfeld, all you have to do is go like, "Hey, my guest here is Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry, what have you been up to?" And then stop talking for 3 minutes.
So the weirdness drew a lot of people in and also but repelled more people who may have tuned in for the first 5 minutes of the first episode and were like, why are we talking about high school bullying on a late night talk show format? I don't understand what's going on here.
I imagine people that enjoyed Tom Snyder hated David Letterman showing up and throwing a blue card through a fake window. And they must have been like, "What is this?" But
Right.
us teenagers back in the early '80s were like, "Oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing ever." But same note, if Letterman had showed up on the Tonight Show and started throwing stuff off a 5-story tower, I don't know if the Tonight Show audience would have been like, what is even happening here? Why aren't you interviewing Robert Goulet?
Yes. I also think that with Letterman taking over for Tom Snyder, there was a generational change where the media executives saw, oh, we need to appeal to younger people because that is where the advertising dollars are. With John Mulaney, most people do not have Netflix with ads. Two, John Mulaney wasn't appealing to the kids and the cool thing people. Those people are on Netflix, on TikTok, Instagram, those things. He was appealing to people from my age, early 30s, to anyone who was a Letterman fan in the 80s. Like, that was his audience. Those are the people I know. It wasn't a broad a show with broad appeal, even though that would be what Netflix hopes for.
It's probably a little too quirky. I think the show worked better when he was at the comedy festival and could just do a bunch of nights with, A-plus listers. That model probably works better. They will have a comedy festival in 26. I won't be shocked at all if they do the third season there at the comedy festival because you could just knock it out in a week. The guests, it's turnkey. It'll be pretty shiny. The 360 of Mulaney helps the festival, helps Mulaney, helps the festival, helps Netflix, helps the festival, helps Mulaney. I think that's a good look for everybody. So I think we will get some sort of season 3, and then we'll just hear that John would love to do it, but his kids are getting older and he just doesn't have time to do it. And we love John and John loves Netflix, and it'll just quietly disappear into the night, would be my guess.
And if Jay Leno is the worst person in the world, John Mulaney is the second worst person in the world because he's one of those weird people. Well, not weird people, but one of those people where his fans have a weird relationship with him in terms of, like, he got sober, changed his comedy a little bit, and a lot of, like, from what I've read, he was definitely, like, a wife guy with the dog, and then they divorced. The timeline of when he got with Olivia Munn is a little dicey, but the next thing we know, she's pregnant, and he's now try trying to stay sober and is marrying her while having a child, and then he had his second child a few years, like 2 years later, with her. So that relationship seems to be working, but the weirdness in his personal life is also turns a lot of people off. And I wonder if that played a role at all, or if you have to be such a comedy nerd to even know that stuff that it might not have factored in because most people aren't aware of the timeline of when John Mulaney had his children.
Yeah, I think for the casuals, you make a parasocial relationship with the people on TV or on podcasts, and you kind of think you know who they are. So Mulaney was, clean cut, skinny kid in a suit. So you just assumed he was one way, and then we found out he had some substance problems. The timeline, if we were to nitpick it, might have some curious dates attached to it. Um, I also have plenty of friends who are divorced and happily remarried. So I don't know what went on in Mulaney's relationship. And if he's
No.
happy, I'm happy.
And
Uh,
his
y-
ex-wife, to his credit, his ex-wife that says he did not cheat on me. We were separated. I thought we were going to reconcile. I found out we weren't, but he did not cheat on me. Like, I do not consider that cheating on me because we were likely to get divorced anyway.
so if they're cool, I'm cool. Now we have,
Oh, she still
Mel-
hates him,
well,
but she defends him in that sense.
he's grown his hair out now. Is that radical? Some find his chin a little more chiseled than it was when he was 25. I don't know if he eats Raisin Bran or why his chin is more chiseled. So if you wanted to, for some reason go like, let's be mad at John Mulaney, let's make a list. We could make a list. But at the end of the day, it's a guy on TV that you don't actually know, and you either like the show or not.
Right, and it's the persona and what parts of it are you buying into, what parts of it are you like, eh, because we can also, like, we're both Letterman fans, but Letterman didn't do things that were that different from John Mulaney.
No, like I said, I really liked the countercultureness of 12:30 David Letterman in the
Yeah.
80s. But even Letterman himself, when he goes to 11:30, he quickly did a lot less of that. And there's the little things. The thing I always point out, the difference between 12:30 and 11:30, the guy who hosted 12:30 was
Hmm.
wearing sneakers. The guy at
Yes.
11:30 was wearing Armani. And it's little things like that that just go, "Oh, okay, we're not
Sneakers
doing
and
that anymore."
khakis.
Yeah.
Sometimes he wore sweaters instead of sports jackets.
12:30, it was a carefully created image that we don't give a hoot and we're just handing in whatever and laughing that the bosses even let us do this. And there may have been some truth to that. But clearly some professionalism. And if you listen to the Letterman pod, he's had everybody on. Things weren't happening by accident. But the 11:30 Letterman presentation was a much more buttoned down to, okay, if I can't have the Tonight Show, I'll make my own.
Yes. And there are eras in Dave's career that align to where he was. With the first one, it's late night. You can go before then to the morning show and when he was at the comedy club, but I'm starting with late night because we could be here all day otherwise. There was late night, then there was late night getting a little older and things were starting to change. Then there was he's trying to get the Tonight Show. He doesn't get the Tonight Show, so now he's going over to CBS. The first like 8 years of CBS was one thing. Then he had his heart bypass surgery, which he mellowed a little bit. Then he had his son Harry, which that also changed him because he has a son. He helped create this human. And then as the show got older, as he got older, how much was he phoning it in because every Friday was Will It Float? And just Grinder Girl and Hula Hoop Girl. I don't remember what Hula Hoop lady,
I don't recall.
but it was definitely Grinder Girl.
So let me break that apart. So two things you said spoke to me. So one, if we just look at the late night era,
Yes.
even I clearly prefer 12:30 to 11:30, and I do prefer the early years of 12:30 to the later years. Let's just look at the opening credits, for example. So when that show first starts, it's
Mhm.
a very understated theme with a voiceover along the lines of "From New York, where insert joke here. It's late night with David Letterman. Tonight's guests A, B, and C." Like kind of understated.
Right, and it would be
The
like
band isn't playing loud. By the time we get to the end of the NBC run, we've got the CGI graphics. We're flying over New York City, past the bridges. The theme's a little more up tempo. The VO's a little more from New York, where insert joke here. It's late night with David Letterman. And, it's getting a little more show busy. The other thing I wanted to react to that you said is who comes to mind from that same time period is Howard Stern. Now, Howard has lost most of his audience because he so greatly changed from what he was back in the 80s. Now, David Letterman evolved for the reasons you just laid out really well, but the difference between those two personalities is I struggle to imagine Howard in fall of 2025 going back to the well now after a decade of being the respectable entertainer, and I've
right,
distanced
he
myself
was
from
in a
everything I've done before.
judge
I don't
on America's Got Talent. That was when I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is Howard Stern that is not what I thought."
So I don't see Howard doing Butt Bongo Fiesta this summer, right? But if late period David Letterman said, "You know what, Paul? I'm going to go up on the roof and throw stuff off the roof." That would have been crazy. It would have just been Dave being Dave. So I think Dave
Yeah.
found a way to age perhaps with his audience, whereas
Yes.
Howard just did a reinvention and the audience wasn't on board. But Dave was still
Yes.
Dave, even though
He
I
grew
lost
up.
interest. But the rascalness was still there and could come out.
And coming back to you mentioned earlier that you watched Late Night, you watched about the first year of Late Show, and then you didn't really watch it until the final episode. Would you care to explain a little bit
Sure,
about that?
I think part of that is just age. So in 1982, I'm 14, and
Yes.
10 years later, I'm in my early 20s, and I have to work every day, so I can't stay up till 12:30 and watch late night TV shows. And I met a great woman who's now my wife, so I was dating and hanging out in
Yes.
New York City, so I'm not sitting home watching television. At some point as I get into my 30s and it's there on
Yeah.
CBS and I have a DVR, I just never went back to it. Maybe because I broke the habit. I clearly love Dave. You talked earlier about watching old shows on Netflix. As excited as I am about the fast channels for Letterman, the problem I have with those is they're not on demand, so I just can only watch what I want. But if you told me Netflix had a box called Letterman and I could just choose from 30 something seasons and pick whatever episode I want from either show, I'd probably every night watch David Letterman reruns.
Yes. With one of the things that I did because I wasn't staying up that to watch late night talk shows during the week. I had school the next morning. I woke up every morning at 5 to get to school by 7 because I had to be in my desk at 7 o'clock in the morning. I would record. It started with Conan with VHS tapes, and because I couldn't connect it to where it automatically recorded WNBC, my dad was always the last one to go to bed. So it's like, Dad, do not forget before you go to bed, Channel 4. Eventually, we got a DVR because there's only so long you can do that before you annoy your parents. And with the DVR, it's then, okay, recording Conan. I can record multiple at the same time. I'm going to record Dave as well, rather than only watching him on Friday nights. And Friday nights were always the least interesting episode because the monologue wasn't current.
Yep.
It was always New York jokes. They saw a squirrel with his nuts in his hand, or whatever the squirrel joke was of the day, and whatever the squirrel was doing with his nuts.
So for those, you're a bit of a super fan. Uh, I'm somebody, I do a podcast 7 days a week. I
Yeah.
openly tape the weekend, and I will sometimes for travel or schedule. I will openly tape an extra day, like this time of year, because I teach on Thursday mornings. I start my podcasting day a little later. So I often pre-tape the Friday Daily Comedy News episode. But I've
Yes.
planned for it, so I will use words like out today on Netflix is this thing, and I have some Friday
Yes.
segments built in. Um, can I get caught with my socks down every now and then because I missed a story that broke Thursday night? Yes, now, I do have the luxury because it's a podcast and not an 11:30 highly produced TV show.
Yes.
If famous comedian dies, I can just drop a bonus episode in between, and I've done this in the past and said like, "Oh my goodness, so and so just passed away. Here's a quick tribute." Okay, in the morning, you're going to hear an episode where I don't mention this at all because I already taped it.
Yeah.
And for podcasting, everybody goes, "Okay, yeah, all right, yeah, dude teaches a
Like, you
college class.
recorded
I
this
get it.
already. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fine." Um, I don't know if the average person on the couch is as attuned to it as you are, going, "Oh, I wonder if Dave pre-taped 2 episodes on Thursday and this one isn't actually, live." Because people assume these things are live, first of all. I
Yeah.
don't think most people even think about the concept of, oh, it was taped at 5:30 or whatever. Because it's
Until you
presented as
go get
live, it's live to
tickets.
tape. So I'm not sure that really bothers people. Occasionally, you might wonder, oh, I wonder why he didn't joke about the UFO landing in Central Park today. But you can get away with it if you know what you're doing.
You can. I believe at some point when it was on Thursdays, it was fine. But at some point, I think they were recording it earlier in the week, and that's when it showed.
So there is that. Like, how soon out do you tape?
Right, and
You
when
know,
it
so
was, I believe at some point, sorry, the Tuesdays, it's like you can't even pretend to do topical jokes because
right.
there were times when they did it, and it's like, we haven't talked about that in 2 days, even though that was the biggest story for 10 minutes.
So, like, how I'll handle that for daily comedy news is today we're speaking on what's today? Wednesday.
Yes.
Um, so I will record Thursday's show and Friday's show to accommodate teaching.
Mhm.
On Friday, I will tape Saturday and Monday, but at somewhere in there, I'll leave Sunday open just in case that things get topical and I don't want to ignore something. You know, I have an editorial calendar, I move stuff around, I've got things scheduled, I can be more timely, less timely. So yeah, you probably are picking up on the difference between taping on Tuesday or taping double on Thursday when it's your weekend and you just want to go home. Which
Yeah.
brings me to Colbert and the hey, we're losing $40 million a year. I don't think it's crazy that the show's underwater. I don't have the finances. I don't know if 40 million is a real number or not. But what was surprising to me about the Colbert of it all is that they went straight to let's let's cancel this thing as opposed to bringing Steven in and being like, hey, look, dude, this thing's losing a ton of money. We got to figure something out. And making difficult decisions. Hey, you've got 200 people. Can we do this with 180? Because we're either going to do it with 180 or zero. Um,
Yes.
does do we even need a Friday night show, or can we just show football highlights or an extra episode of CSI, whatever, on Friday night
Yeah.
because we have numbers and Friday night is lower rated. So let's only do four a week.
Mhm.
And why don't we double tape the Thursday episode? So we'll do two on Wednesday. So it's only a 3 day week. So we don't have to bring the crew in 3 days a week. And I know that's painful and people are going to make less money, but they're either going to make less money or no money. Do you need to be at the Ed Sullivan Theater because our guy says we could get a lot of money for that real estate? And we've got all these studios over here at Black Rock. So why don't you just do it in Studio 7C and it'll be a smaller audience and we can bring the
Yeah.
cost down there? Why didn't they have any of those conversations?
Yeah, I don't think The Late Show needs to be in the Ed Sullivan Theater. That is a nice to have, but that's not what makes The Late Show The Late Show.
Right. Late night was fine in a little room. I don't know if you ever went to a taping of either Dave or Conan.
I
But
unfortunately didn't. With Conan, my parents weren't fans, so even though the age was 16, that would have taken a lot of convincing to have my
uh,
parents bring me there,
the room is
especially.
sorry, the room is surprisingly small. I'm laughing at the 16 because my very first time I saw Letterman in person was my 16th birthday. My aunt knew somebody who worked at NBC, and you had to be 16 to get in, and I had just turned 16 that day, so that was my first taping.
And Letterman, you had to be 18 for those, and by the time I was 18, I was in college already, and then aligning the summers, and it just didn't make sense. After I graduated, I did have an interview for the Page program. When like the summer before, I was in the top 50 of potential interns, but I didn't get called in for an interview. So I came close to working on the show in some capacity. I was crushed at the time. Now I'm like, okay, maybe that was for the best, but un- never got to see it in person, unfortunately.
So that may or may not have been a blessing. I never worked on either show, but I
Right,
can tell you sometimes you meet your heroes and it doesn't go as well. So, from one standpoint, if you're backstage and you see Cranky Dave, if Cranky Dave is a real
right.
thing, I don't know. I've never been
I saw
backstage.
cranky Alan Coulter, who was just
Okay.
complaining about his job, like, "Oh, it's been such a," where it was normal stuff, like, "It's been a long day, I can't wait to go home," which just pulls you back into, it's a cool job, but it's still a job.
Yes, when you see this how the sausage is made, it can turn you sideways. I got to see a lot of showbiz during my time at Sirius, and you nailed it. It's a job. I would have coworkers who would come to me and be like, "Oh, you guys are working Comic-Con. You're so lucky." And I'd be like, "Please understand, we're putting in 16-hour days. Now, part of the day, am I hanging out with the entire cast of The Walking Dead? And is that cool? Yes and yes. But we're working. I'm not hanging out and gossiping with them about The Walking Dead. I'm going, Mr. Lincoln, you're going to sit here. Okay, here's how you adjust your headphones. Let me hit record.
Yeah, here's
Um,
your bottle of water.
yeah, here's your water. Cool to meet him, but we're not like hanging out at Comic-Con. I'm not walking around in a Spider-Man costume. I'm working 16 hours a day, which is better than doing construction out in the heat. But we were working.
Yeah. And it's not like you were getting photos with them or asking for autographs.
No, in
It's
fact,
just you were just
um,
there.
I have very few photos from that time because the best way to economy of English get along with celebrities is to stay professional.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of Bruce Springsteen. I worked with Steven Van Zandt, who is the guitarist in the E Street Band. If you're from New
Yes.
Jersey, you know this, but I'm just doing the thing where we explain to
Yeah,
the audience
I
who
went
someone is.
yeah. I have
Um,
a story
I
I'll finish and
I
I'll
I
tell it.
worked with Steven for 5 years before I ever said the word Bruce because we were working on a show together, and I was just
Little
Johnny and
Steven's
he was
Garage.
Steve. And yeah, specifically the Wise Guy Show. I was overseeing that program that Steven put together. I never said the word Springsteen. I didn't like go, "Oh my God, it's so great to work with you. I'm excited about the Wise Guy Show, but boy, I've seen you guys in concert 30 times and I love the way da, 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 and you're celebrating." Like, they don't want that. It's just like, okay, what are we doing today on the Wise Guy Show, Steve? And let's go.
Right. You might after you get to know him, you might ask, like, how was the tour? But you're not like, so how awesome is it that you hang out with Bruce
Yeah, it
Springsteen?
just, and your relationship becomes you're just John, a guy he knows. Um, and
Yes.
and you stay professional.
I went to an event at the Count Basie Theater. He was raising money for the theater, and I have no idea why they did this, but it was a Joan Jett concert, and it was a bunch of rich people, and a few of us were able to get $100 tickets that included food. So it's like $100 for this private event. I'm seeing Joan Jett and a few other bands, and I'm getting lobster empanadas. Okay. And it was standing room, whereas usually Count Basie is seats, but we're just standing around. Steven is just walking around. I almost literally ran into him because I didn't realize he was right behind me. But it's just like, oh yeah, he's just a normal person
Yeah.
socializing, trying to make sure his charity event is running smoothly because he was working. He wasn't
Yes.
just like, hey, everyone.
He's great to work with. He's exactly who you think he is. For anybody who's never met him, he's who you think he is. And
Yeah.
I always share. He
Yeah, like
does
he
tend
did
to.
not care that I almost ran into him.
No, he's a cool guy. Yeah,
Yeah, he
he
was just
tends
like,
to stick to his vision. I'm making up this example, but it captures the spirit of what he's all about. So if we're discussing what we should get for lunch, he'll go, "Yeah, I'm in the mood for cheeseburgers," and then you and I go, "Or what about empanadas?" And then he'll go, "Let's just get the cheeseburgers," and the discussion's over, and that's it.
that is fantastic. Like he knows what he wants.
Yeah, that is fine,
And
and he's not a jerk about it. It just, he's got a vision, and if in that room, if he's quarterback one and he's calling the plays, okay, we'll get cheeseburgers.
otherwise, you're going to have an hour discussion about what to eat for lunch. And by the time you figure it out,
Yeah,
you're going home for dinner. That definitely makes sense. And do you have anything else you want to add or talk about before
I'm
we
wondering what
wrap
else we
up?
could say about Jay Leno. again, just to bring this full circle, he seems like a nice guy. I've never met Jay Leno. I've met a lot of people. I never met Jay Leno, but I've listened to a lot of Jay Leno interviews, and
Yes.
he seems like a nice guy.
Yes, he does. Which is why I feel like with the Tonight Show thing, no one was wishing ill will on him. It was just go work on your cars. Someone give him like the American version of Top Gear, which he did Jay Leno's garage and CNBC for a while. And when he went through that year period where he was on fire and had severe burns, and then he got clotheslined literally while he was riding his motorcycle, no one was like, "Oh, like, like, I wish he like, oh, yeah, he deserved that." It's like, is the man okay? Like, what is going on here? Like, somebody, like, watch him.
Well, the thing with him falling down the hill, at first you're like, wait, Jay Leno fell down a hill?
At a
Is
Holiday
he
Inn.
is he in a gambling debt or something? But as you unpeeled it and you heard him tell the story anyway, um, he he's got Four Seasons money, but he doesn't seem like a Four Seasons kind
He's
of
not.
guy. I think his mindset is, and I understand this, I'll talk about myself in a second. Um, I think his mindset is, I'm here for 6 hours, this is fine. And also in that particular region where he was performing, there is no Four Seasons, so you have to
Right.
stay somewhere. And sometimes a Holiday Inn Express is fine.
Yeah.
I always explain I'm a bartender's son, so that's who I am. If you give me $1 billion, I'll probably still keep doing daily comedy news because I like doing it. I'll continue driving my red Kia because I like my Kia. It's just a nice car and I like the big giant moonroof. I don't need a Maserati because what am I going to do with a Maserati in New Jersey anyway? Will I probably buy a beach house or two? Yeah, but at my core, I'll still be me. And if I'm in the middle of Pennsylvania, I might stay at a Holiday Inn Express. It's fine.
Yeah. And it's not I need to get the experience of real people. It's like that was the hotel that was there. I stayed in it. Like, what do you want?
Yeah. And it sounded like he was hungry and he went out for a walk and fell. Maybe someday some wacky true version of the story will come out and we'll do another episode about Jay Leno wasn't what he thought. Speaking of
Gambling
which,
debt.
I encountered Dr. William H. Cosby a few times in my career. And I have a few stories that I'm not going to share until he has passed away. So there were some aspects to his biography that I was like, huh, okay. But I very much had encountered the professional Bill Cosby that you would expect.
Yes.
You know,
I went to a Martin Luther King Day breakfast or brunch, and he was the guest speaker there. So I got the same Bill Cosby. He was signing his books, and it was the professional Cliff Huxtable Bill Cosby. And
right.
then everything comes out, and you go, whoa.
So I'm not saying anything nefarious about Jay Leno, but maybe someday we'll find out he's been at a war with the Yakuza for years, and he took on six ninjas that night, and they pushed him down a hill, and that truth will come out, or he's just a nice guy who's taking care of his wife, and he was hungry, and he fell down a hill. I don't know.
I think he was just having a bad. If it was your friend, you'd be, oh, yeah, you should stay home for a while because it's not your year. And I think that was what was going on with him. But because he's Jay Leno, people make a big deal out of it. There were plenty of what is Conan doing to him jokes on social media because this is all Conan's fault, clearly.
Well, I think you're right because here, if I give you a new story, Conan O'Brien was staying at a Holiday Inn Express and went out for food and fell down a hill, and now he has a black eye. I don't think we'd be looking for the conspiracy theory, right? We'd be like, oh, poor Conan, wouldn't we?
Uh, yeah, we just be like, why was he at a Holiday Inn?
Yeah, and then he'd say, "Oh, I was in the middle of nowhere, and it's just somewhere to stay for 6 hours." Oh, look at Conan. He's just like us. He's down to earth. He stays at a Holiday Inn. He's not all uppity like those other Hollywood celebrities. We love Conan, right? So it's just, I don't know.
Right, where I'm like, the fact that he was at a Holiday Inn Express is the most Jay Leno thing about this story.
Yes.
Thank you, Johnny Mac, for coming on Greetings from the Idiot Box. I appreciate you talking about Jay Leno, and we finally got to meet after hearing each other on the Letterman podcast. Like I said, I have been following comedy news and your other newsletter on Substack because it is part of my school and my job to stay up to date on everything in television and entertainment by extension. So thank you for making my job easier.
Well, thank you for having me. And just as we're talking about my other Substack there, this gets into the what we were talking about earlier with the millennia of it all. I
Yes.
deliberately throw fastballs and nothing but fastballs on my Substack for attention. I deliberately load the headlines. I deliberately take slightly obnoxious takes to foster discussion. So I love to tell everybody I'm actually nicer in real life than I am on my
Yes.
Substack. My Substack is deliberately a little jerky for attention. So if someone only
Right.
knows me through the Substack, they might be like, oh, that guy's kind of a jerk. Whereas in
Right.
real life, I think most people describe me as nice. So, so there's that. So, you know,
Yes.
there's public persona and then the real person.
Right. And that's where we get into parasocial relationships, and those get weird because you think you know these people who you've only seen on television or only read their books, and that's all made up on some level, whether it's based in truth or something more like Andrew Dice Clay, where that's not who, like, the Dice Man is not who he actually is as a person if you were to run into him on the street.
It's a character. Gilbert Gottfried was a
Yes.
character.
Yes. If you hear Gilbert Gottfried talk in his normal voice, you're like, "Oh, he just sounds like a guy from New York. He doesn't sound like the Aflac duck."
No, he was a very quiet spoken man, but then he could turn on the Gilbert persona.
Thank you again. This has been Greetings from the Idiot Box. I'm Allison Lips. Check out Johnny Mac's Substack, Daily Comedy News. Remember, until next time, television is a medium neither rare nor well done. Bye.